Okay, let's get things moving. So thank you all very much indeed for spending some time with me this evening. I think you probably all know, but my name is Andy Agafangelo. I'm the founder of the Transparency Task Force. The Transparency Task Force is an organization I built from scratch starting about 5 years ago. We take what we do very seriously. We think we're doing work that matters. We think we're doing things that are important. So the Transparency Task Force is a collaborative campaigning community dedicated to driving up the levels of transparency in financial services. We think it's very important that this happens. We're a very mission-led organization. Our mission is to promote the ongoing reform of the financial services industry so that it serves society better. We think that the finance industry, for want of a better phrase, sometimes loses its way. I'm being very polite. And we think that there are things that can actually be done to put things right. So rather than just thinking there's a problem and ignoring it, we would much rather say, okay, let's have some very, very honest conversations about what's wrong, and let's have constructive dialogue about what can be done to put those issues right. We have a vision. Our vision is something that's not going to be achieved overnight. It's going to take years and years and years. But our vision is basically this. We want to build, and we are trying to build, I guess we are building, a respected international organization that exists to protect the consumer's interests. We think there are dozens, hundreds, perhaps even thousands of bodies within the financial services sector that in some way are there to represent a particular group, a particular part of the industry. But we think that the consumer's interests are very severely underrepresented, and there are many reasons for that. So we're all about trying to stick up for the little guy, as it were. We operate through 13 groups. We have people focusing on topics such as banking, foreign exchange, pensions, investments, etc. This particular event is something that chimes well with a group that we call the malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct, and mis-selling group. It's got about 70 or 80 people in it, and most of the people in the group, unfortunately, are individuals who have suffered as a consequence of white-collar crime, scams, scandals, that kind of thing. Now, we actually have about 2,600 people around the world connected to the Financial Services Transparency Task Force, and all the individuals we have are in one of our groups or another. Something we've done quite recently, which I'm going to mention for a couple of reasons, is we've published a book. I'm going to show you the front cover of the book for a particular reason. So please bear with me, folks, while I get to the book. I think I'm going to be able to do this okay. It's always a bit nerve-wracking when you're sharing screens and so on, because you never know it's going to work properly. But here we go. It seems to have worked. Okay, so I'll put the link to this book in the chat in a moment. But the reason I'm showing you the book is because the front cover has this picture. The golden dragon on the right-hand side is the back of the book. The golden dragon represents the way the financial services sector should behave. And I'm not going to spend time talking about that. What I am going to do is spend time talking about the front of the book, which is represented by the picture on the left. And I'll send you a link. You can read this for yourself about why that is the picture for the front of the book. And basically what you're looking at there is a 12-headed hydra, a 12-headed monster. In fact, the picture is a fusion between two classic stories. One is the classic story of Hercules and the Hydra.
Alan and Gina.
Join the meeting.
And the other is the classic story of Androcles and the lion, which is when Androcles discovered a very angry lion in the forest. It was angry because it had a thorn in its foot. All of that you can read about. The bit I want to particularly draw your attention to are the people. You might see that at the bottom of the picture there are people. In fact, there are 10 people. And there's a reason why there are 10 people. And the reason why there are 10 people is that these 10 people are bodies, they are dead, and they are there because according to research by Oxford University, and again, I will put the link into the chat, you can see this yourself. According to the link to the research by Oxford University, over 10,000 people committed suicide as a consequence of the global financial crisis. Now, we all know that the global financial crisis had many causes. One of them, of course, was the malpractice of banks, taking excessive risks and destroying the economy. It's a huge topic. And I'm making the point about the 10 bodies, the 10,000 people who killed themselves, because many of those people will have been individuals who will have felt severely harmed as a consequence of malpractice by the financial services sector. And I'm making a connection between that topic and tonight's symposium. And I'm making a very serious symposium, a very serious point. I routinely speak to people who are in tears or close to being in tears because they've had their life savings scammed away from them. I don't know about you, but if I lost a £20 note on a tube train or in the street or in a pub or on a bus, or if I lost £20, I'd be annoyed about it. You know, imagine if you've had your entire life savings tricked from you as a consequence of unscrupulous crime. And of course, we all know that this is happening far, far, far more than it should be happening. And some would argue, and I would suggest that one of the themes that might come out this evening is that these scam activities are far more prevalent than they should be. And perhaps it's because, in part, because the regulators have not yet got to grips with how to close down scam operations, how to close down crooks in the system. And one of the themes that keeps coming up time and time again in the conversations we have is how when individuals have given the regulators information that we believe they could and should act on, but for some reason they fail to do so, it effectively lets the crooks off, and those crooks we know carry on doing the sorts of things that they are doing. Now, we've got a pretty balanced attitude towards the regulatory system. We are not about attack, attack, attack. We're not about destroy, destroy, destroy. We don't think it's all bad. We don't think there are, there's a hidden agenda to not do their job properly. But we do think that, like any large institution, any large regulator is going to have flaws and have scope for improvement. So our attitude of mind towards the consultation paper that has led to this event, our attitude of mind is to be constructively critical. Yes, critical, but always constructively critical. We're not about just pointing out problems and leaving it at that. We want to point out what we think the problems are, and we want to suggest real, practical options that could be implemented to try to fix things. That's what we're all about. And I can sleep well at night without feeling guilty, without wondering if I am doing a disservice, by always being constructively critical. So during the conversations we have this evening, I would encourage everybody to participate in a constructively critical way. There's no point being critical just for the sake of it. That doesn't achieve anything. Let's be very solution focused, as well as being very, very, very honest about what we think is really happening. And the good thing is this: the Transparency Task Force is answerable to nobody. I'm answerable to absolutely nobody. I'm not under the influence of sponsors. I'm not under the influence of people with big checkbooks. I'm free to do what I think makes sense. And that means I'm able to, I hope, create forums and environments like tonight's symposium where people are free to say it as they see it, where people can feel free to comment as they wish. I think tonight's topic is particularly important for reasons that I expect are going to come out during the session. And I think it's fantastic that Mark Bishop, who's one of the speakers, in fact, the first speaker tonight, drew my attention to this particular consultation just about a week, 7-8 days ago, I think it was. And we very quickly realized the significance of the consultation. We very quickly realized we ought to respond to the consultation, and we also draw other people's attention to it as well. And we wanted to do that because for various reasons, one might think that this is a consultation that has kind of gone rather unnoticed over the summer period, and we're doing all we can to draw attention to it so that everybody that could and should respond does so. So thank you all very, very much indeed for being with us. I'll cover off a couple of housekeeping points, and then I'm going to invite Mark Bishop to talk to us, and he's going to share some slides. I think you'll find his session particularly informative. So housekeeping point number one, we are recording this session. We may well use all of it or snippets of it on social media to draw attention to the ideas and the information that gets exchanged tonight. So the very simple rule is only say something that you mean and that you believe to be true. If, however, you say something that you wish you hadn't, then that's okay. What you need to do is pop my colleague Alexandra, who's with us behind the TTF shield, pop Alexandra an email. Alexandra, please pop your email into the chat so you can quickly email Alexandra and say something like, "Dear Alexandra, please make sure that what I just said doesn't go out on social media," etc., etc., etc. That's the first point. Second point is this is definitely not, I repeat, not Chatham House. Absolutely not Chatham House. Chatham House is a bit of an anathema. We want people to say what they think and think about what they say, and feel free to do so. Also, please do use this opportunity to connect with people. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the way Zoom works now in the chat function. Feel free to, for example, put your LinkedIn link or your email address into the chat, etc., etc., etc. And we do have some members of the press here tonight. We've got a few, which is great to see. We are extremely grateful to the media that are already paying attention to this topic, because we think it's a topic of significant importance, not just tactically, but also strategically. We really do need regulators to do all they possibly can to serve society first and foremost, and that's what we can try to encourage to happen. There will be time when you want to make points or ask questions. That's absolutely cool. Just raise your hand, wave at me, draw attention to yourself, and I'll make sure I do that. I've asked all the speakers to speak for maybe 10-15 minutes or so, plus 5 minutes or so for Q&A. And I think at least one of our speakers might want to reverse that, perhaps just to spend maybe 5 minutes speaking and let's leave the rest of it open for Q&A. Anthony Stansfeld's going to be speaking for just a minute or two. He's actually got one of the just a minute speaking slots, but he's got it ahead of the rest of the program because he has to be elsewhere after about 7 o'clock. So please brace yourselves for what I think will be a very honest conversation about where we are. We have, of course, invited the FCA to participate in this event, and for whatever reason they've declined the offer to take up that invitation, and that's absolutely fine. We're cool about that. So I hope everyone is hunky-dory. We're now going to hear from Mark Bishop, who's going to introduce himself and talk to you about his thoughts. I invite you all to click onto Speaker View. So if at the top right hand of your screen, you see Gallery View, that means you're in the correct mode, okay? It means that a lot of your screen will be taken up by the speaker and all the speaker slides. If at the top right of your screen you're seeing the words Speaker View, you need to click onto it to get onto Speaker View. I hope that's all okay. Very good. All right, so Mr. Mark Bishop, thank you very much indeed for alerting me to this consultation, educating me on the issues around it, and also being with us this evening to speak. Mark, you're ready to take it from here, and I can see you've already very competently got yourself onto the slide mode, and you're good to go. Mr. Mark Bishop, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, and apologies for starting with the question slide at the end. I didn't realise that would happen, but hopefully you can see the first slide, and that I have entitled this presentation Regulatory Failure, Who Pays? And the reason why I've done that is I think that's the elephant in the room. I think that's what this debate is really about. So I thought it's best to cut to the chase and discuss that. It seems to me in general that there are 4 candidates for who should be paying when there is regulatory failure in financial services.
Mark, could I just interrupt you there? So forgive me interrupting you, Mark, but 2 things, if you don't mind. First of all, can you please speak as loudly as you comfortably can, because there's not a particularly strong sound connection. And secondly, just give everybody a little bit of background to yourself and why you've ended up in this space and why this is of interest to you personally. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll speak a little louder and hopefully you can hear me okay now. Can anybody nod if you can hear me all right? So I'm one of the investors in the Connaught Income Fund Series 1, which was a collective investment scheme that operated between 2008 and 2012. This is not some dodgy boiler room scam. The operator and promoter of it was Capita Financial Managers Limited, so the financial services arm of a FTSE 50 company, which currently has, I believe, around 80 billion pounds worth of assets under management. It was described as a low-risk scheme. Only sophisticated professional and high net worth investors could invest in it, and one could only do so via an IFA. So I took the low risk option, and the entire thing went very badly wrong. The detail of why it went wrong is not for this presentation, but the short version is it was a Ponzi style fraud, but it was firstly made possible by, and secondly, it was, in my view, protected and enabled to continue by the Financial Services Authority as it was back in the day. I'm conscious of my 15-minute limit for the presentation, so if it's okay with you, I'm going to go straight back into the detail of the presentation. So there are 4 candidates for who can pay, should pay when there is regulatory failure. The first option is the perpetrators and the enablers of the fraud or misconduct. The second option is the industry, which may in turn pass it to the consumers. And this can happen via the Financial Services Compensation Scheme or via the FCA as part of its operating costs. Both feed into the levy. Third option is society. It can be socialised amongst all taxpayers. The fourth option, of course, is the victims. The people with the narrowest shoulders can bear the burden, and that's often what happens. Financial services, I think that is not the best outcome, both in terms of social justice and also in terms of fixing the problem. I think transparency drives accountability, and that drives performance. With perpetrators and enablers, they're of course the preferred option for paying the costs of regulatory failure when there's a scam or whatever. But there are 2 problems with this. The first is that the money may be dissipated. Indeed, they may not have profited. Sometimes it can just be a case of misadventure or negligence rather than dishonesty. And the second option is that very often the FCA lets them off. There can be a small fine, there can be a negotiated settlement. There may be a lack of transparency and an option of charging back the costs to them. In that case, some kind of negative externality is inevitable. So the debate is really about which is the least bad option, and also probably the most important, what's the legal position? So the legal position is set out in the Financial Services Act of 2012. Within that act, there is good news and bad news for us. In strict terms, the FCA is exempt largely from civil liability. Politicians at the time the act was passed were concerned that the FCA could be hit with very heavy litigation costs, that litigation could be a big diversion for it. Also that open court proceedings could involve confidential information that's protected by Section 348 of FISMA, and information that's protected by legal and professional privilege being under pressure to be disclosed in court proceedings, which could impede the work of the regulator. 2 exceptions were set up in that act. The first was bad faith, criminality essentially, and the second was breaches of human rights, particularly the right to the quiet enjoyment of one's assets. But there was definitely an intention of politicians that the regulator should pay, particularly where there is regulatory failure, and that this should be possible without the need for litigation on those limited grounds. The idea was that anybody who felt they'd lost out should complain direct to the regulator. If they didn't get satisfaction, they should appeal to a person described in the act as an investigator. Therefore, there'd be an investigation. And that person would have an unlimited power to recommend compensation, unlimited as to causation and to quantum. And these costs, of course, being part of the operating costs of the FCA, would be met via the levy by the industry, which might then pass them on. The benefits to this process are firstly transparency, because it's the only effective way of measuring the effectiveness of the FCA. The lower the cost of regulatory failure, the better the job it's doing. Being a cynic, one might say the reason why the FCA doesn't want to pay the cost of regulatory failure is that if it had to do that, that cost would be quantified and it would be large. The second is it creates an alignment of interests between consumers and the industry. Neither of them wants to pay the cost of regulatory failure that would be passed on to both by the levy. The existing scheme, unfortunately created by the FCA, already moves the goalposts compared to what the Act says. It limits the right to recommend redress in the cases of regulatory failure. It requires the Complaints Commissioner, as he's called, to consider the possibility that the actions or inactions of a firm are the underlying cause of loss. Of course, this is no use to consumers if the firm has been let off, money is already gone. Also, he's required to consider that the industry and ultimately consumers would have to fund any payouts. Of course, this is true, but I'm arguing that that's a good thing, not a bad one. The Complaints Commissioner is not really an investigator. The FCA in this current consultation exercise admits that he carries out a common sense analysis rather than an investigation. The law says it should be an investigation. The result is that the costs of regulatory failure are borne mostly by the victims. Sometimes they're borne by the industry via the FSCS. But of course, this is not a transparent means of doing things because the compensation scheme is set up mostly to deal with scheme failure due to insolvency, not due to regulatory failure. The Complaints Commissioner, Anthony Townsend, has for the past 4 years been highlighting the gap between current practice set out in 2013 and what the 2012 Act actually says. And it's this lobbying that has led to the current consultation. However, as we will see, it's not going down the route that he hoped it would. But as you can imagine, when regulatory failure is not kind of charged back to the regulator, when there's a lack of transparency about it, there is a lot of regulatory failure. In fact, it's become endemic. Currently, the FCA is subject to an unprecedented 3 external reviews. The Commonwealth Income Fund Series 1, in which I was an investor, London Capital and Finance, and the interest rate hedging products redress scheme. But actually, there are a lot more. I've listed there just 8 examples of situations or cases in which I believe regulatory failure was at least as serious as in the first 3, and where those people, I think, also have a legitimate reason for there to be a review as to how the regulator performed. In all of these cases, of course, the regulator, or the victims rather, hope for redress from the regulator for the regulator's failures. These 3 first reviews that I mentioned are due to be completed in quarters 3 and 4 of this year. The FCA has done a lot of work to limit the scope and the protocols of these reviews, hoping that they would be less damaging to the regulator, and this has given itself extensive and asymmetric maximalisation rights, so it's going to challenge anything that is critical about it before the reports are published. Now, despite all of this, I believe that all 3 are going to be very damning, and in the Connaught case, I would be surprised if they do not allege bad faith. Also, I noticed that the FCA has an extremely busy autumn coming up. On the 24th of September, the annual public meeting happens. Anybody who went to last year's will know that it ended in utter chaos, with security guards having to safeguard the well-being of the FCA representatives on the top table because there was so much anger at them. On the 5th of October, Nikhil Rathi starts as a new chief executive, is very experienced, does feel like a Treasury placeman. On the 30th of October, the Complaints Commissioner, Anthony Townsend, who I think has been broadly on our side, will step down. We don't yet know anything about his successor. The IOHP and Connaught reviews, I believe, will be finalised in September. The LCF one sometime between the 30th of October, 23rd of November. I don't know when the FCA will publish these. Everything I know about the organisation leads me to believe that it will probably publish on the same day because it's one lot of bad news rather than 3. It likes to kind of manage its reputation. In the Connaught case, the complication is that it's an enforcement action still outstanding, and that must be concluded, I think, before publication. So all of these things make me think that publication will probably be some date after the end of October, but probably this year. And of course, here against that background, and just before all of those things happen, we see the FCA attempting a further land grab. It's embarked on the 14th of July on a truncated consultation exercise on a revised complaint scheme. This consultation is lasting for 2 months rather than the usual 3, 4 or more, and this is despite there being a summer break and COVID-19. If you contrast that with what's happened on duty of care, a lot of consumer organisations in the emission review back in 2016, I think it was, argued for there being a duty of care. The FCA, of course, didn't want this. So it said, we should have a separate consultation about this issue. So it did so. And then it said, well, we really need a further discussion paper. And we've seen kind of a little bit of that, but nothing more, no discussion. So we're 4 years and counting. Whereas with this consultation, the deadline's the 14th of September. There's been no PR trying to encourage people to take part in it. And I have to say, it does have the feeling that they are trying to shore up their position, formalise their current situation, their protection from civil liability from the complaint scheme before those 3 reports come out, which I believe will all allege regulatory failure. Under the proposals, the FCA would also gain the right to ignore complaints it dislikes. It can simply say, this complaint is vexatious, we choose to ignore it, and that would also be binding on the Complaints Commissioner. It's making a big fuss about the fact that there is very user-friendly language in this new document, but it conceals some very powerful deterrents to complainants. Of course, there is the right to ignore complaints, as I've mentioned, but there are also financial limits on the payouts that can be recommended. I do believe that this is a classic case of a subject where there is an opportunity to unite the industry and consumers on the same side. The industry is facing a record FSCS levy rise, and I know there has been some talk about legal challenges to this. More cases are getting compensation via the FSCS, and I predict that there may well be more payments than have been agreed so far to LCF investors, and that there will be a further tranche of money coming from FSCS to Connaught victims as a result of the enforcement review that's underway. It's much better that these things should be channeled via the FCA. You could argue, well, it all ends up in the levy, but if it goes via the FCA, it highlights the causation. Causation is not the insolvency of firms in default. The causation is regulatory failure. It also incentivizes the regulator, the FCA, to try to charge back these costs, the misconduct costs and misadventure costs, to the guilty firms, and not try and impose them on consumers, if consumers will then go and bite the FCA by trying to lay them back on the FCA. In the Connaught case, there is a little bit of a side issue, which is that there is a possibility that we may use a loophole to pursue the officers of the FCA for what's known as malfeasance in public office. And if we're successful in that, it may be that the FCA will also align with us in wanting to be able to pay out for misconduct costs or for regulatory failure costs. It's much less painful to accept defeat on these things than to have individual officers pursued, and they will likely defend themselves by saying, I was only pursuing the policy of the organisation, and that kind of leads into misconduct in public office and prosecutions. I think it's very important that we don't just resist the FCA's latest proposals. We should be demanding a scheme that is better than the current one that is compliant with the 2012 Act. I also think there is an argument for lobbying politicians to remove the FCA's civil liability. Transparency is essential. It drives accountability, and that drives actions and behaviours. And we've seen that the FCA is failing, and a way of helping it to succeed would actually be to make it transparent and accountable. I also think we need a way of revisiting legacy cases, people whose complaints were either rejected or given derisory compensation, or who even didn't bother complaining because they could see there was no point to it. You know, in Australia, we've seen that there was a royal commission to deal with legacy cases, and I think that there is a case for something similar in the UK. And if there were such a thing, I also think there may be an argument for socialising the costs where there is no longer an industry firm standing that could bear them, because essentially we all chose to elect what I would call corporatist governments that supported this era of not just light touch but minimal regulation, to use the infamous phrase. Transparency about the FCA's flaws will help cut future costs by driving improvement. I think we should think about what political environment we're operating within as to whether these things are achievable and how best to achieve them. First question is whether corporatism is in retreat. You know, during the Brexit discussions, Boris Johnson apparently used the phrase "fuck business" because he was fed up with the CBI and others trying to keep us in the customs union. And some people see this as the day that red Toryism went mainstream. But on the other hand, you know, many of the rebels that got kicked out of the party, lost the whip, had it restored, and some of them are even now in the House of Lords. So at best, the Conservative Party reached a truce with its corporatist wing, and one could argue that Labour's is in the ascendant under new leadership. So certainly one can't say that corporatism is currently defeated in British politics. And also on a pragmatic level, COVID is adding massively to government debt. It really needs to maximise tax receipts from the city, and it needs to be nice to bankers because it needs to keep borrowing money. So there's maybe possibly a limit to how far this kind of red tourism will go. But on the other hand, COVID-19 has actually brought a silver cloud, a silver lining, because it has highlighted flaws in the administrative state. The people at the top of Whitehall were found wanting, as were some of the quangos, such as Public Health England and Ofqual. And to quote Dominic Cummings, the hard rain is coming. And in fact, if you look at what's happening at the moment, that hard rain is already beginning to fall. And it seems to me, therefore, the political opportunity for us is to kind of merge the rhetoric of corporatism and the reality of the reform of the administrative state, and position the FCA as a lackey of the city, an organisation that is failing because it has set its mind against the interests of the people. And it's absolutely important that our response in conclusion is really effective. We should, of course, call out the opportunism of the FCA, but I think we must go further. We must demand the rights set out in the 2012 Act, and not just resist the proposed further deterioration. We must ensure there is justice for legacy cases. We must put pressure on the Treasury via the media and the Treasury Committee. I also think, and I just float this finally as a maybe point for consideration and discussion later on, I wonder whether there should be a judicial review. We should at least threaten one. If you've got a law that says that a certain course of action should be pursued by a statutory body, and you've also got a consultation that says the majority of people want that course of action, and the regulator goes and does something different, I think a judicial review might say, maybe this is not reasonable, and perhaps it should reconsider. And that might be very helpful to us. And perhaps even just the threat of a judicial review might get us what we want. And just I'd like to leave you with a final thought, an overriding principle, which is that cutting the cost of regulatory failure, which suits all of us, requires transparency about its causes. Okay, I'd like to thank you very much and ask if anybody has any questions.
Mark, thank you. You've done a great job squeezing in a lot of information in a very rich, time-efficient way. Huge appreciation to you, Mark, for doing that. I know that you spent a lot of time preparing your presentation, and you've also spent a lot of time preparing the consultation response. Mark, just remind everybody, when is the consultation response deadline? By when do people that want to respond need to respond by?
It's the 14th of September, and I would really like to put in a big plug here and say, I know that Transparency Task Force will put in a submission, and I think it will be a good one, but I would ask everybody who's on this call to consider putting one in. And the reason is the FCA is required to take account of the responses. When it consulted on the current scheme, there were 18 responses, 8 from consumer representatives, 10 from the industry. Now, if there were instead, 8 from the industry and 30 from consumers, and most of the consumer ones said, we need the 2012 rights put in place, I think it would be very much harder for the FCA not to do that. And I think if we did want to go down the route of judicial review, we'd be much more likely to succeed.
Thank you, Mark. And I've just literally, just this second, put the link to the consultation. If you want to do one in your own, please do. There's absolutely no reason why any one individual couldn't respond in their own right. If you want to team up with TTF and become part of the group we've got working on it, please do that. But do something. It's important to do something, because the way our system's designed to work is that we get a chance to feedback.
Andy, can I interrupt for a minute?
We will. Yes, Gina.
Can I suggest, hello everyone, can I suggest that we don't do a joint one? I think it's actually, there are lots of ways that they can discount a joint contribution. It's much better to actually do individual ones. I mean, Mark's is brilliant and we can take bits from that, but it's actually very important that it's seen as different individuals and different bodies that are actually contributing. I think, I think Sue, I call on to maybe confirm that, but I think it's really important that we don't do a joint response to this.
Okay. Thank you, Gina. I bow to your experience on these matters. I think that sounds like a very good suggestion and overrides what I was thinking. So let's do that.
Andy, yeah, just come in here with a compromise suggestion. I would like to suggest that we do both. Transparency Task Force exists, an organisation, and it has every right to put in a submission. But I absolutely agree with Gina. I think everybody in this call should put in a submission. Don't just think because Transparency Task Force is doing it, or because you've added something to what the TTF response is, that your job is done. This is a numbers game. Honestly, if there are more people lobbying for what we're asking for than there are for the status quo, then it's very hard for the FCA not to give us what we want.
Thank you very much, Mark. And again, thank you, Gina. Okay, we've got a few minutes for questions. So please just wave if you'd like to make a point, ask a question, whilst folks are doing that. Yes, Gina?
Sorry, another point is that I think what is also very important is bearing in mind the compensation scheme, is that we get victims, is that we can cajole as many groups supporting LCF, yourself. I think it's very important, and the human side of this is fed into the consultation as well. So I think I'd say to reach out. I know it's only 2 weeks, but really important to reach out to all of those groups, circulate the link and get them to put in their own experience, because some of the ones that I've read and I've seen, from example, the LCF of, you know, suicide in families and what has happened, it's absolutely heartbreaking, and we must have that out in the consultation, because remember, the FT will have to publish it to the contributions. And I think it's really important that we have those personal stories in there.
Thank you, Gina. Very, very good point. Very well made. Alex Varley-Winter is waving frantically at me. Alex, please take yourself off mute and make your point. Thank you, Alex. Nice and loud, please, Alex.
I was just wondering, Gina, how many of those cases have already been in the press, or would it be a case of us or people interviewing victims? Because that's what I like to do. I like to compile case studies in brief, and I'm quite adept at doing that. But I'm happy to either pull examples from the press or do interviews and compile them if necessary.
I think it's stronger to make them the interviews, because if it's a reported of a third party, it's never as strong in the consultation. So I think it needs to actually be a in-person contribution or recorded of a personal experience.
Yeah. What we've been doing recently, thanks Alex for your point, we've recently been video interviewing pension scam victims for the Work and Pension Select Committee's inquiry on pension scams. It might be that we try to do something like this. It's very labour intensive, but we might try and do it. Any other questions or comments, folks? Mark, I'd like to ask you one. I'd like to recap on a key point that I think you've made. If I've understood you correctly, what you've been saying is that since the 2012 Act, there's been a gradual dilution of what Parliament seemed to want to be put in place. What has happened to actually cause that dilution as you see it? And is it realistic to say to the regulator that, you know, really what they ought to do is put in place a framework that would be capable of complying with what the Act required in the first place?
Yeah, so I think that two things have happened. The first thing that happened is that when the Financial Services and Markets Act, when the Financial Services Act 2012 passed, the FSA then embarked on consultation about the new complaint scheme, not unreasonably. And it did so, as you'd expect it to do, with what might be seen as leading questions. And it maybe, perhaps it revved up, who knows, I have no proof of this, people from the industry that will respond in a particular way. But the result of it was the 2013, I think about April 2013, paper that basically said we've now considered all of these points, and this is what we've decided. And what we've decided was, broadly speaking, the scheme that we've got now. It further refined that scheme in 2017 by publishing a paper that clarified, in its view, questions about compensation. And taken together, those ones really include the points that I summarised in my presentation, which were that the Complaints Commissioner had to consider whether, although there may have been regulatory failure, actually the failure was to prevent misconduct by a firm, and therefore it's the firm's fault. And therefore, why doesn't the firm pay the redress? Of course, the problem is the firm often is gone, the money is gone, or the FCA has done a deal with the firm. And the second thing that they had to consider was whether actually If there was big redress paid to the victims, this went onto the levy because part of the operating cost of the FCA, and therefore industry and consumers would pay it. And that was positioned as being a bad thing. You know, it's not a perfect thing, but it's probably less bad than the other options. Is the case that I'm trying to make. You may or may not agree with this. So, so that's really how it came to be. And I think the second part of it is, that, of course, the Act says that there should be an investigator, which implies there should be an investigation. Now, the way that the complaint scheme has operated has never really been an investigation. And if you read the current consultation document, it makes a virtue of it. It says the reason why there shouldn't be big amounts of compensation is nobody's really investigated these things. Nobody's interviewed witnesses. There's been no kind of search for information. All there's been is a common sense review of the documentation. So actually, it's happened by custom and practice that there isn't investigation. My view is go back to what the law says. There should be an investigation. The person appointed as commissioner is an investigator, and there should be a right to issue compensation, and the law issues no restrictions on what that right should be.
Mark, thank you very much for a full answer there. We're going to go to Sue Lewis. I think Hannah's putting her hand up as well, but let's go to Sue Lewis first. And Sue, if you don't mind, please do introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
Hi, Sue Lewis. I do all sorts of things. Former chair of the Financial Services Consumer Panel, with a frog in my throat, apologies. Thanks, Mark, fabulous presentation. It would be useful to share it, not because I think we want to respond with a template, because that's too easy to ignore, but we can then take some of your arguments and tailor them into our own responses. I think this legal thing is really powerful. Just to also to observe that that Act also removed the obligation on the FCA to respond to the Financial Services Consumer Panel. So it was taking a sort of slide away from the consumer in that Act. I mean, it's quite gratuitous. You know, why take it? It was just totally gratuitous. But I think that was signalling a sort of move away from the kind of consumer, despite all the rhetoric, and despite all Nikhil's rhetoric as well. I mean, he can say what he likes until he gets in the chair, and then, you know, he'll be got at, I'm afraid. Yeah. Don't quote me on that one.
Thank you, Sue. I should point out, I'm very pleased that we have been joined by somebody with the FCA this evening. Chris Hamilton has joined us. Chris is, I believe, the head of news. I think that's the title from the FCA. So Chris, you're very welcome to be with us. Thank you for taking some of your time to be with us today. And I hope you find the session very useful, very interesting. And it'd be nice to hook up with you in due course and have a conversation perhaps. Okay, we've got time for one more quick question or comment if there is one. Would anybody want to wave at me? Hannah, is that you raising your hand, Hannah?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Hi, Hannah. Please introduce yourself and make your point. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. I'm Heather, actually.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Heather.
Yeah, that's okay. No, that's the word that came up. There were just two short points. I won't go into the background of my experience, my small experience with the FSCS. But Mr. Mark Bishop mentioned common sense review. I can confirm in my case that didn't take place at all. A decision was made before before they had even received my application for compensation. And those decisions are being made. I don't know if you're aware of this. Behind the veil are private companies. So the FCA stroke FSCS have outsourced their job to private companies. So there are clear conflicts, conflict of interest, so that they're rejecting applications before they're even made, and they would not even provide me with a reference number. So extremely dodgy correspondence where that no reference numbers, no signatures, no sort of, and this is going right to the top council in the FSCS, you know. So and there's no excuse for them not paying out in my case. So they're only there as window dressing to reject perfectly legitimate complaints. And when I did attempt to broach the situation with the FCA, they clearly had washed their hands entirely of the FSCS, what's going on in the FSCS. So it really needs a forensic investigation.
Heather, thank you so much for sharing this information with us. If you don't mind, Heather, I'll try and connect with you in due course, and we'll have a conversation and see if we can do something to raise awareness of your experience there. Heather, thank you very much for sharing that. I noticed that Mark Bishop has very kindly put into the chat the presentation he shared, so you can download that. And Mark's also put in the chat, I believe, Mark, that's your working progress consultation response, is that?
Yes, exactly. That's it.
It is, and I really do urge everybody to take a look at it. It's a very intelligently put together document. It's fair, it's balanced, it's factual. The logic's pretty kind of, rock solid. I think it's a great piece of work, Mark. Well done. We can't all kind of, round of applause, etc. So what we do in our community when people have delivered a presentation, we all kind of wave like children at each other and say, thank you very much, Dean Mark Bishop. So please all join me in waving like a child at Mark Bishop for his presentation. Thank you. Join in, go for it. You can do it. Thank you very much. Okay, lovely, lovely, lovely. We're going from one very, very experienced person to somebody who's even more experienced. Anthony Stansfeld is going to be talking for just a couple of minutes and perhaps then might respond to a few questions. I've known of Anthony for I think maybe 9-10 months or so. He's somebody I admire to the nth degree for all sorts of reasons. If you want to know about Anthony and his background, find him on Wikipedia and you'll see his background. I admire Anthony for many, many reasons. One of them is that he seems fearless in terms of speaking to power, and that's great in somebody who's got the role that he has. So Anthony, over to you. I encourage everybody to make sure that you're on speaker view, and you'll know you're on speaker view if what you're seeing at the top right hand corner says gallery view, and what that will mean is that when Anthony is speaking, you can see him nice and large in your screen as opposed to little skinny thumbnail. Okay, Anthony, over to you. Please do unmute yourself if you haven't already, and off you go. Thank you, Anthony.
Right, thank you very much. I'm not sure if I deserve that, but I haven't had my feet cut off yet, but I'm expecting it. Thames Valley Police took on a bank. It took on HBOS, and it took on one particular branch that was heading up a lot of the major frauds. And I take no credit for Thames Valley Police taking it on, but I'm delighted that we did. And it was a major fraud. It was approaching £1 billion. We only prosecuted on 245 million. And we put away 6 people, not senior bankers or middle rank bankers, went down for 48 years. It cost us £7 million and we didn't get that money back. The Serious Fraud Office and 2 other police forces had turned the cases down. And so if we hadn't taken it on, nobody had been got any compensation at all. I think the compensation was resisted at every stage by Lloyds Bank. They did their best not to pay out, and they're still not paying out to a lot of people. They're only paying out to those people really that were mentioned in court. And of course, we didn't prosecute the whole £1 billion. We'd still be in court today. I think it would have taken so long. And we got the maximum sentences that were realistic in the case. Lloyds instigated an internal review of compensation, which I have to say was a joke. And then Sir Ross Cranston did a review of the review and said it was, criticised it heavily. But even Sir Ross Cranston didn't get to the bottom of who should have been paid out, and a great number of people have not been paid out. But what became apparent is it wasn't just HBOS running this out of Reading. That was comparatively, I believe, small compared to what Lloyds Bank and RBS and others were actually doing. The National Crime Agency itself has said that we were losing 190 billion a year in fraud. And if you actually look at the amount of money that's being put into actually doing something about it, it's 0.03% of that amount. The police have so many other things to deal with. They've been cut very heavily over the past few years. And the police find it very easy to say a fraud is either a civil matter or pass it to action fraud. And action fraud, we know it was well exposed in the Times, but I think we all knew it anyway, was a call centre in Glasgow. and it just disappears when it goes there. Nothing is ever really done. We have a number of regulatory authorities who should be dealing with it. What I find is so extraordinary is that people like you and I should be taking this on, when it should be the regulatory authorities. We've got the Financial Conduct Authority, we've got the Serious Fraud Office, we've got the National Crime Agency, we've got the FRC, the Financial Reporting Council, the Bank of England's PRA, the City of London, and then you have all the regulatory bodies within the industries, the SRA and RICS, which are meant to be protecting their customers, not protecting their crooked members, which they seem to do far too often. 17 large files of forged documents and signatures have been lodged with the National Crime Agency. They started by trying to hand it all to the Financial Conduct Authority, who passed it on to the SFO, and is back with the National Crime Agency at the moment. Treasury Select Committee asked them well over a year ago to investigate these files. As far as I'm aware, absolutely nothing has been done about it. I don't think the NCA actually has the facilities to even do it. But the NCA also has a very easy out that it won't tell you if they're investigating something, and I can quite understand that. But it's quite clear that they haven't, because none of the people involved who've had their businesses taken away, their houses taken away or anything have ever been interviewed by them. So they're clearly not doing the job. Very quickly, I'll just say what I think we actually need to do about this. I think there are far too many regulatory authorities. I think the Serious Fraud Office should go into the National Crime Agency, and there should be a much, much bigger economic crime centre within the within the National Crime Agency. It's far too small. It doesn't really investigate, and it needs to be properly funded. And we also need to set up at a regional level with the police forces, and not at a local constabulary, but at regional levels we hold counter-terrorism and serious organised crime. There needs to be a third arm, which is serious fraud. And it all can be paid for, I believe, quite easily by the fines that the Financial Conduct Authority takes for company misconduct. The Financial Conduct Authority should be dealing with misconduct. The National Crime Agency and police forces should be dealing with crime. And most of this is, if you actually start looking at it, just blatant crime. And when there are reports that come out that demonstrate clear crime, and the classic one was the Turnbull report written by Sally Masterton, and that came out, the bank, Lloyds Bank, had it for 3 years and sat upon it. Their executive board sat upon it. The only thing they actually did was sack the person who wrote it and then lie about her. She eventually was compensated because I and others like Lord Hollick stepped in and insisted. And her report, which is well substantiated, and she was fully authorised and asked to write it by the head of audit and risk. Nothing has been done about it, and it clearly showed that not only did they hide in their audits, and they have to be signed off by their chief financial officer, they hid a massive fraud they knew about, and the fact that there was a massive hole in the accounts of both HBOS, which allowed Lloyds to go ahead with rights issues of 13 billion. Nothing has been done about any of these things. Nobody has been held to account. In Australia, they've had a royal commission because similar things were happening there. They were on a far smaller scale, I may say. And in America, the banks were hugely fined for this, and they got a grip of it, and people have gone to jail. At the moment, we've done absolutely nothing about it in this country. I have put briefs now with the Home Secretary, and I hope that something will be done about it. But I have to say, there seems to be more interest in our regulatory authorities in covering it up than actually exposing it and sorting it out and stopping it happen again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anthony. It's always great to hear you're very direct and very honest and very straight talking around these matters. It's hugely appreciated. Okay, let's see if anybody would like to make a point or put a question to Anthony. Raise your hand if you do. We have one from, I think I may pronounce this correctly, forgive me if I haven't, Ardashir Araki. I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself, and please do, once you've unmuted yourself, sir, introduce yourself and put your point to Anthony. Thank you. You've done it. Great.
Oh, good evening. I'm afraid I'm not Ardashir Iraqi. I'm Paul Gregory, speaking from
Okay. Okay.
the link here because I had difficulty in getting the link. First of all, Anthony's question about budget is the most critical one. He's put it very plainly. In another field, the NHS were acting to suppress fraud in a small Oxford area, and they got results and then doubled the budget, and then they doubled the budget again, and they got a 13-to-1 ratio of return over cost. And it's quite clear with the scale of these crimes that are going on that something similar should be happening with the bank and other frauds, because the people that are committing the frauds have all the money. So that's one particular section. The other section that I'd like to mention is I'm not sure that any of these regulatory bodies can mark their own paperwork, because the same thing has happened with the contaminated blood scenario, where the Ministry of Health was trying to, wash over this. I think it needs a completely independent outside view, be able to go in and walk in and see everything that's there. And I think that would be very important. Following on from this, of course, the Ombudsman is necessarily not effective, and I can go into details on that later, but not here. We need to be quick. That's my comments. Thank you.
Mr. Gregory, thank you very much indeed for your comments. Great to hear them. We're going to go to Nikki Turner, who's one of our speakers shortly. But Nikki, I can see you waving your hand. Nikki, please introduce yourself and make your point. Thank you.
So this is a question for Anthony, who obviously, because I've been involved in the HBOS Reading scenario, I know Anthony and the police, what the police are doing quite well. I wonder, Anthony, after all the years of what you've been doing, if you feel that finally you are making progress, because on the other side of the fence we're dealing with the civil situations, and it's very tough going. So I wondered if you've got any words of encouragement of any progress at all, that the police are going to find it easier to prosecute crime. And do you think that it would be easier if the police regained the power that the CPS have taken and could just look at the crimes themselves and decide whether they should be prosecuted?
I feel progress has been very, very slow, 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards the whole time. I think there is being a far greater priority is going to be given by the government, because I think they've woken up to the sheer amount of money that's being lost. I mean, it's about the cost of the National Health Service, this. And if you put a small amount of money, as we've just heard, into actually doing something about it, and I say a small sum of money, I'm not talking about a small sum, I'm talking about, 300 to 500 million, but that is taking on something that is getting on for 200 billion. And that would have an enormous difference. And we have to set a few examples. We have to put a few senior bankers in jail. And I think once you do that, and it's visibly seen, that we will stop this. But at the moment, they seem to have, they pull down their solicitors, Herbert Smith Freehills, and they just cut everybody off at the feet. And even if people win case after case, they're eventually outspent by the bank's lawyers. And of course, the bank's lawyers have unlimited amounts of money, of their shareholders' money, being wasted on cases that they shouldn't be defending. And of course, what they are defending is not the bank, it's individuals within the bank who are responsible for this. So I do think it will not work unless we put the money into it, but it will pay for itself very, very quickly.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and also Nikki for your question that led to the response. Sue Lewis, once again. Hi, Sue. Go for it.
Sorry to talk a lot.
No,
I just want to pick up that point of Anthony's and ask him, do you think the SMCR will make any difference? I mean, it should do in theory, but I'm not convinced, but I'd like to know your view.
And I'll just briefly comment in case somebody's not aware. SMCR is the Senior Managers Certification Regime. Essentially, the idea is to make individuals accountable for mistakes, so that if individuals are accountable within organisations, their organisations are more likely to behave in the right way. Anthony, over to you.
One would like to think so, but the sheer weight of lawyers on the backs if they don't want to take responsibility is so huge that I doubt if it will have an effect. I think it requires prosecutions to bring this to an end.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Sue.
My view too.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Anthony. Final question or comment from Heather. Once again, go for it, Heather.
Thank you. I'll shut up after this, but I thought that the little thing that I'd prepared hopefully dovetails into and drills into what Anthony is saying, and then drills down into the Solicitors Regulation Authority, but ties it all together. If you please bear with me, and as I say, I'll shut up after. Under the Financial Services and Markets Act 2000, the Law Society, as an applicable approved regulator, is answerable to the Legal Services Board and the Financial Conduct Authority. It is what is referred to in the Act as a designated professional body that has specific statutory obligations. According to the principle of regulatory independence, the Law Society must not exert or be permitted to exert undue influence or control over the performance of regulatory functions or any persons discharging those functions. Further, the Schedule to Internal Governance Rule states that, quote, each approved regulator must delegate responsibility for performing all regulatory functions to a body or bodies without any representative functions. That is key. But the Law Society, it purports to have fulfilled this duty by delegating its responsibility for performing all regulatory functions to the SRA. However, in reality, the Law Society has carefully crafted a conflation of representative and regulatory functions. In the SRA, the supervisor of firms and solicitors actually represents the interests and even takes instructions from the solicitors being complained about. I can confirm from my own terrible experience that the SRA gets their supervisors to conduct fake investigations, which they falsely claim are real and independent. However, no SRA supervisor has the authority to conduct investigations themselves. The supervisor must commission an independent investigator to carry out their own independent investigation. And that investigation may well be within the four walls of the SRA. In reality, any conscientious, effective oversight of Law Society members is so deficient that even the departments responsible for supervision and investigation have been melded into one as the, quote, investigations and supervision department. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. This perverse situation hardly conforms with the Law Society's statutory obligations and the absolutely essential requirements that SRA supervisors be independent of investigators, as explained by former head of SRA investigations, Mr. Barry Cotter, in Chapter 15 of the Counter Fraud Practitioners Handbook. This situation, which we uncovered, that is myself and Mr. Colin North, would appear to be a flagrant abuse of the Law Society's immensely powerful position. And until this deceit is tackled head on and the Law Society is fully untangled and held to account in a way that Anthony chairs, I think that's terrific, and a proper, completely independent body is formed to genuinely represent the interests of the public, consisting of officers of the law who are fully trained to uphold the law and investigate and prosecute in accordance with the criminal law, this incredibly evil situation and the crimes that are taking place as a result will continue until every last one of us is completely ruined. Anything less is simply changing the deck chairs on the Titanic. And keeping in mind that behind all of these organisations are other stakeholders, e.g. insurance companies. So that's why they reject complaints and claims.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for squeezing these points in. My colleague Alexandra, who's with us behind the TTF logo, Alex, can you please arrange an invitation to go to Heather for myself, Heather and Alex Farley-Winter to have a conversation, because I think you've presented us with a very powerful insight, Heather, that we want to try to raise awareness to. I'm now going to go to Shaida, who before she dives into her point is going to remind me how to spell her first name so I can get you on the screen properly. Is it S-H-A-I-D-A?
Yes. Andy, I've got to go, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. Can we all wave goodbye to Anthony, please, folks? Thank you very much. Thanks, Anthony, as always. Thank you very much indeed. Brilliant. The world needs more Anthony Stansfelds. It's as simple as that. Shada, please unmute yourself, Shada, and make your point, Shada, but please be nice and quick for me. You need to unmute, Shada.
I just would like to fully support what Miss Heather French said regarding the Law Society. My case is clear, and her case is clear of the failure of the Law Society. And as a victim of this solicitors regulation authorities, I have from 2000 until now, 19 years, I have made a complaint to the Law Society, and I've gone through all changes the Law Society have had within their structures, from the Consumer Complaint Service to the Consumer Conduct Service, and from there to SRA. And my case has been fully supported by my MP and the Police and Crime Commissioner at different stages, and the latest one is Mr. Anthony Stanfield. Before he goes, I was going just to thank him. Without his help and support, I wouldn't be in my house. Being a victim of the solicitors who has...
Sorry, Shada, forgive me. I've had to mute you because I need to manage the time of the program. But Shada, thank you very, very much indeed for making your making your point. And hopefully, in the general discussion a bit later, please come back to it, because we want to hear the rest of it, but I can't accommodate it at this point in the program, Shada. Okay, thank you. Thank you very, very much. We'll come back to it. Okay, we need to move swiftly on. So our next speaker is Nikki Turner. So can you make sure that in the top right corner you see the words gallery view, which will mean that you're in the right mode, you're in speaker view if you see gallery view. So please, Nikki, pick it up from here. Thank you very much indeed. And if you don't mind, Nikki, not everybody on the session will know who you are. So if you don't mind giving us a bit of background and context, first of all. Nikki, over to you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Am I on? I can't see.
Yeah, you are. Perfect. All good.
So my background is that my husband and I have been in the rock and roll business all of our adult lives until we were defrauded by HBOS Reading, and Lyndon Scowfield was our bank manager. And we realized there was something really horribly wrong when he was dismissed and the bank tried to close our business. And then we discovered many other businesses down. It was like waving a big red flag to us, being so aggressive to us. And so we started investigating, and here we are all these years later. We did manage to get the police involved and get people sent to jail, and we are still fighting for the proper compensation for people. And in the meantime, we set up SME Alliance, which supports business owners who are being abused by banks. And also I was a trustee of Whistleblowers UK to support whistleblowers specifically in the financial sector. So we kind of ended up with a completely major career change over the last 13 years. And we're very aware that we started dealing with the FSA in 2007. when we tried to alert them to a major fraud and they were not having any of it. And all these years later, I would say there's a kind of rule of thumb running through this, and that is, if there's no investigation, there's no compensation. And this is very much what is happening in a lot of these compensation schemes. So in the current one we're looking at, they would say, if you've had died and you are a victim of HBOS Reading, then it's very clear to see where the loss is and where the gain is, because it's been through the criminal trials. But anyone who didn't have Quayside, well, that hasn't been through the criminal trials. GRG hasn't been through the criminal trials. IRHP hasn't been through the criminal trials. And this somehow has allowed this willful blindness that's been going on for years and years of, well, there's no proof. So we have these civil situations whereby we say, yeah, something, because of course the FCA and the FSA before it will not look at individual cases. So when we reported HBOS Reading, they just said to us, go away, Turners, because you're an individual case. And we went, no, we're not. We're representing loads of people here who've all been defrauded in the same way, we allege. But they weren't having it. And, you know, one day I will tell the tale of how the police got involved, but I personally don't believe it was because it was reported by the FSA or the FCA, which is not to say that I'm entirely critical of the regulators, because I can see, you know, it's a continual balancing act, but it's a balancing act that's so heavily weighed on the side of the banks and not the consumer, because at the end of the day, if they don't support the banks, it will affect the economy. And we can all see that, you know, if we were to compensate every victim of bank abuse properly, including all the GRG, all the Lloyds BSU, all the other BSUs across the land, then it would be PPI times 50, and it would take down our banking system. Our problem is, and you know, I'm part of the BBRS and trying to sort of negotiate with banks and trying to help get the victims of Reading justice, is that we have, and I think, I can't remember, Shida and Sue, I think, Heather brought it up. Our problem is that we're not just fighting the banking system, where sometimes you do get common sense, and we're not just fighting the regulators, where very often you can get common sense, but they can't act on it because it would be too catastrophic for the banks. We're fighting this huge legal battle the whole time with some super smart people who are just, at every time you take 2 steps forwards, they're going to make you take 3 steps backwards. And it is just a really sort of dead end situation that we keep plowing away at. But I'm not really, at the end of the day, I always come back to the same thing. Terms of reference done before anybody sensible actually has anything to do with anything. And no investigation, no compensation. And that is something that the banks heavily want to rely on. And now we see the FCA itself, you know, a lot of the things I read in that, in this consultation is language that I'm hearing a lot from the banks at the moment. And it's, you know, they're using the word common sense, and they're using the word, let us simplify things for you. And, you know, all of these things are really quite sinister if you don't believe that they mean what they say. I don't know what the answer is. I keep, you know, I've been doing it for years now, and I'm going to keep plowing away at, let's just try to collaborate with all the key players to find a resolution. But yeah, I don't actually feel more comfortable now in 2020 than I did in 2007 about what the ultimate goal of the regulators are, and if they really can help the consumer given the terms of reference. So I just really want to say that, because I'd rather have questions than you know, I don't want to pontificate about my views of various people in the regulators, although, you know, there are some very good people in the banks, but hey ho, we are where we are.
Nikki, thank you so much. You set the scene lovely for a Q&A session, and we really appreciate you sharing your extensive insight over many, many years. And I think I first watched one of your videos maybe about 9 months or so ago, and you really ought to be acknowledged for what you and your husband and others have managed to do, not just to try to get justice for yourselves, but for literally hundreds and hundreds of other people. And I have to tell everybody, one of the recurring themes that comes up in the conversations we have is when people feel like they are not being listened to and not being taken seriously, and they get frustrated, they get despondent, and then sometimes they give up. Sometimes they do much, much worse than giving up, if you get my drift. You know, things could not be any sadder. I think Mark Bishop's got his right index finger up, which means he wants to say something. Mr. Bishop, go for it, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to make kind of 2 comments, which could be regarded as comments, as questions, if Nikki wants to respond to them as such, to what she said, which is, you know, we're not sure how to get a result in this. And I'd like to bring together 2 points. The first is what Anthony Stounsfeld said. He said go after the individuals, prosecute the individuals. And I think there's merit in that. Individuals are weaker than organisations. And the second one is And I think this is probably Nicholas Shaxton said this. He said the reason why big capital likes the City of London is because there is very strong, very weak regulation in the UK, which means that they can rip off the little guy. But there is also very strong criminal law, which means that nobody will take the money of big capital. If you're in a kind of third world dictatorship, the dictator might well take the capitalist's money. Doesn't happen in the UK. So I think if you put those two principles together, use the criminal law against individuals. So in the Connaught case, what we have there is a situation in which we believe that individuals at the FSA decided not to use their statutory powers without good reason, and the result was that a fraud was able to continue for a number of years. Now, if we're right in that, then the criminal offence of misconduct in public office has been committed. I'm not saying that it has, and I'm conscious that somebody from the FCA is on this call and this call is being recorded. So I'm saying, I have reasonable grounds for suspecting that this is the case, and I suspect that if this case doesn't end up in a fairly large financial settlement and some humble pie being eaten by the FCA when it comes to agreeing to verifiable reform, I suspect that there will be individual officers of the regulator, past and possibly present, finding themselves with criminal charges. Now, I think if you do that a couple of times, politicians will take notice. And I also think that the regulator will take notice and it will sue for peace.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for a very, very thought-provoking response to Nikki's comment about, what do we do? I think you've just set out one very logical course of action. Thank you. We've got time for one or maybe even two more before we have a quick comfort break. You'll all just about have enough time to grab yourselves a cup of tea or coffee or something in just about 2 or 3 minutes. Would anybody like to say anything before we go to break?
Can I just reply to Mark?
Please do, Nikki, please do. Thank you.
Well, of course, Mark, the thing is that the reason we managed to make such an issue of HBOS Reading is that we focused on the individuals. And that is how they ended up in prison. It took us 10 years of fighting not just the bank, but also, so many other factions. Now, who wants to do that? But if we hadn't done the first 3 years, the police wouldn't have got involved. And that is the problem. We just happen to, my husband just happens to be a pit bull when it comes to justice, and he was never going to give up. And so we did get to that point. But it is a completely flawed system where individuals have to, with no regulatory knowledge and no real knowledge of fraud in any event, have to, in order to get to that point. And we can't expect other people to do it. So that's, what we need to do is we need to support people like Anthony, and we need to really be lobbying, which you and I both do on a regular basis, to get support for the police. Because not all the banks want this situation whereby everybody in the bank is tarnished by the same brush, or everybody in the FCA is tarnished with the same brush. So it would actually be a really good thing if we could support Anthony in getting a really good organisation together that actually really looks at the criminal part of fraud in banking, so that people like Paul and I don't have to.
Yeah. Nikki, thank you very much indeed. Mark, we'll hold it there because we're going to go for a quick break. So the time is 19 minutes past the hour. Not everybody on the call's in the UK, so it's 19 minutes past the hour. Can we all please be back ready to restart at 25 minutes past? We've literally just got 5-6 minutes to have a short comfort break. And then when we get back, we're going to have Gina and Alan Miller sharing their thoughts. I'm sure everybody will find that particularly interesting. So we've got a 5-6 minutes breaks, folks, and be back by 25 past the hour, please. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
And as it turns out, the insolvency practitioner who's in charge of sorting out the business end that had nothing to do with the original problem. So I'm in a position at the moment, for the last 5 years, the insolvency practitioner has been treading so carefully against the bank to obtain information that they still haven't got it after five years, from which pertinent information will be available to then go back and attack the statutory trustees and the regulator. So that conflict of interest is that they all share the same lawyers firm, and the lawyers hide behind the ability that different offices or different senior partners can act for both parties involved in a conflict on the basis that they are completely impartial and everything else. When you've got the size of organisations as a regulator and statutory trustees who are dealing with millions of pounds or billions of pounds, there comes a point where if action needs to be taken from against one client and another client of the same overall umbrella company, it will get up to the senior partners level. And then it's a balance. Now, do you actually then follow a regulator who they're getting millions of pounds of fees from, or an individual who they might get £10,000 fee from? There is a conflict of interest, and I think that is the basis now of all the delays in a lot of the litigation, or the ability to even get to court or with anything, because you cannot get hold of information and it's all dragged down.
You make a really interesting point, Bob. I've never ever heard that point made. I think it makes a lot of sense. Bob, thank you very much indeed for sharing it with us. Super stuff. For those of you that don't know, Bob is a real guru when it comes to pensions related issues. We know that pension scam victims are really in a lot of pain as a consequence of what's happening. And Bob is one of those guys who knows the topic extremely well. Thank you, Bob.
There is just one aside, sorry, and that is that if you are individuals or small organisation trying to take action, you haven't got the funds to do it. So there was one instance of
Bob, I'm going to mute you, Bob. Only out of respect for the rest of the audience, so we need to move on. But there is going to be a chat session later. Please chuck it in there, Bob. Always keen to hear what you have to say. Thank you, sir. So we're now going to hear from Gina and Alan Miller. So please make sure at the top right of your screen it says gallery view. If it says gallery view, it means you're in speaker view, which means Gina and Alan will be occupying the bulk of the screen when they start speaking. Gina and Alan are probably known to all of you, but just in case Gina and Alan want to give a bit of background, please don't hesitate to do so. And over to you. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'll start and then we'll hand over to Alan. So I think I want to concentrate, because of the urgency of this consultation, on the practical that we can do, the practical steps and the timelines. I think this is really important, because many of us on this call, I think, have probably been sort of talking about this for some 15, 20 years. And we know the issues. We've talked the issues, we've talked them around, we keep moving the chairs, as Alan says, on the Titanic, so does the regulator. I think it's really, really important that we not just, if you like, feed into this consultation and submit our views, but I think we collectively and individually ask for this consultation to be halted or paused. I really do not think that a consultation which has, if you read between the lines, is aimed at closing down the scope and capping to 10,000 any individual complaint that could mean a loss of hundreds of thousands. This is just unacceptable in every shape and form. And I think it's really important that we don't let this consultation go its full course. So I would say that my first point would be that we feed into it and we ask for it to be postponed until what I call the Danes reviews actually happen. I think it's really important, when you look at the depth and breadth of evidence that that's going to be in both the Gloucester report and the Dobbs report, and well, we knew those two in particular, that this consultation, it's an insult to consumers that this consultation should happen before those reviews report. And I think it's really important that we collectively do that, both not just in the consultation, but I think to every MP, Parliament, everyone we can write to. I think this consultation has to be paused. That's my first point. I'd say my second point is that it is so rotten. Every part of the regulation, every part of the way the consumers are dealt with, that I think we've got to take a step back, is my view. And rather than look at the individual parts of what's going wrong, I do agree that I think there needs to be a push for a commission on this, akin to the Australian one, because the FCA is not fit for purpose. the regulation is not fit for purpose. We have a regulator that is nothing more than an industry dog, poodle, because, you know, there are just simple things such as, you know, how can you have senior members of a regulator who can then go in the revolving doors and end up back in the industry? They're never going to properly regulate the industry they can then go back into and receive hugely inflated salaries. How is it possible that they can be impartial if they are allowed to do that post leaving the regulator? So I think there are substantive issues that we can't resolve individually. I'd say many of us have tried individually to do that. I think it's time for, my view would be a collective call to try and persuade the political will to pursue a royal commission, but in the short term, a hand challenge that we have to pause this consultation.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I haven't really got much to add. I mean, all of us here have seen many items of evidence of really lack of regulation, individuals being kind of hit with their life savings. You know, we've all collectively tried to protect people, tried to protect the consumer. And the contrast with the US could not be more stark. You know, when we hear these examples today, just think about what would happen in the US. You'd have the FBI going into the firm, you know, files being collected, people being sent away for long prison sentences. What happens here? Absolutely nothing. I mean, of course, they're odd examples, but they are infrequent. It's not as if these things don't go on every day. And we've got to kind of, for our own sanity, try and do something that actually helps everybody. It actually will help the industry and help the consumer. And the FCA is so broken. It's not, you know, the average person working in the FCA. I'm sure they come in every day trying to do their best. But if the culture is broken, if the organization is broken, if there's regulatory capture, which there clearly is regulatory capture on an almost unprecedented scale, then the only solution to stop us all collectively going completely insane is to have a kind of replication of the FRC after years and years of the FRC not properly regulating company accounts and financial matters. Eventually, it was kind of given the treatment it merited with a proper organization replacing it after a proper review by a proper individual. And that's what we need for the FCA, because unfortunately, no matter how good the new individual coming in, and we all hope for the best, but unfortunately, we have to plan for the worst.
And actually, can I just add, just before we open up the question and answer, is that, you know, it's got to be, there has to be political will. And I can't remember who mentioned earlier the fact that, you know, London is attractive because of its low regulation and lack of will to prosecute. That is, I can see, will only get worse. But the thing is that in all of this is that I think we do have an opportunity. I want to be positive on this, because I do think that the reviews that we'll report give us a platform to jump off, to ask or pursue a royal commission. I think I'm confident, because of the individuals conducting the reviews and the evidence that they have actually been given, that it gives us an opportunity we haven't had before. To have 3 reviews all reporting in fairly close sequence, I think gives us an opportunity we haven't had for many, many years. And what I would say is we have to organize ready for those reviews to come out, to then collectively, and I'd say maybe one thought is to see if we can find people who've retired from the industry, because again, there was a point made that we're asking individuals and people who are in ordinary consumers to become experts. I wonder if there are experts out there who have worked in the city, who have worked in the industry, who now may be retired, who are not in a position, a much freer position to be able to contribute. So I wonder if there's a way of us contacting people who've retired from the banking industry, from the FCA, from the institutions, and see if now that they're freer from their shackles, their corporate shackles, that they can actually help us as well, not just the consumers, because they will have the knowledge that none of us have And I think that if we could spend this time before the reviews actually trying to bring people together, so we have this collective voices of a variety of stakeholders to ask for this Royal Commission on the back of the reports. I think that would be a very strong and forensic strategy for us to pursue, rather than many of us doing what we've been doing for many years, individually trying to get change, because I just can't see that we'll be able to do it.
Gina, I think you've set out a fantastic plan of attack here, an absolutely fantastic plan of attack. Now, some of you may not know, because you may know Gina and Alan for various reasons. Some of you may not know that for years and years and years, Gina and Alan have been running the True and Fair campaign. I'll just put a link to the website. So please do understand that Gina and Alan have been doing a remarkable job for, I think, 9 or 10 years, maybe even longer, battling for consumers of financial services products to get transparency on things like costs and charges. And in all honesty, Gina, quite literally, if yourself and Alan were to ask for support in asking for a Royal Commission, then we'll do all we possibly can at TTF Land to try to get behind that, and we'll do all we can to get the word out. And frankly, there's I ran a couple of events in Australia last year, and all we talked about was the Royal Commission. All we talked about was the Royal Commission. And what the guys and girls in Australia explained to me was that the Royal Commission happened when the media got it. When the media got it, that the public in Australia were being shortchanged by the financial services sector, when the media got it, that the public in Australia were suffering, quite literally suffering, as a consequence of an industry that was riddled with conflicts of interest, and some would even say corruption. When the media really got it in Australia, the media made it happen. So I think part of that strategy, Gina and Alan, is obviously going to be about reaching out to programs like Moneybox and journalists like James Hurley and people like Tom Kelly at the Daily Mail and others to really
not to be funny, Andy, but we've done all that. We've been doing it for years. I mean, I can't count how many times we've been on Moneybox. Paul is fantastic. It actually, because I helped with and worked with the Melbourne authorities equivalent to the FCA on a lot of the work they did. It is actually getting on board the industry players as well, for them to see that it is in their interest to not be tarred by the brush of being a failed sector, and them understanding that the good players shouldn't be compensating the bad players. And it's also getting the industry on board. And then when they did that, as well as the press, I mean, all the stakeholders have to be involved. I think Mark's raising his hand.
I think so. Mark, please do. If Gina and Alan are happy, we'll go straight into Q&A mode. So let's do that. Please do. Mark, was that your hand raised earlier?
Yeah. So 3 things. First thing, I absolutely agree with what both Alan and Gina said. Couldn't agree more. Second thing is a way of doing this. You know, if you're going to call for something, and that something is unprecedented, essentially we're saying, you know, stop this consultation. 2 things: stop the consultation. Secondly, we need a Royal Commission to fix the regulation and compensation thing. I think the way of doing that is a public letter. I think not just all of us sign it, but I think try and get as many people from the industry to sign it. It may be that the previous Complaints Commission will sign it. It may be that Martin Wheatley would sign it because, you know, he may have been ineffective, but he was on the right side. You know, try and get it something huge and then release it to a newspaper. The FT or the Times are the only ones that I think really count. But the third thing is a tactical thing. While we call for these things, we don't know whether we're going to get them. And the deadline for this consultation is still the 14th, and that is fast approaching. So I think we should all still submit our responses, but the introductory piece to it should say, number 1, we've only had 2 months. There was no publicity, so this is a truncated exercise, therefore truncated response. Number 2, there was a public call for this process to be stopped and for there to be a wider Royal Commission, and we endorse that. Does that sound fair?
It sounds very fair and very, very well put. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Can I invite anybody else that would like to make a point to raise their hand? I can see Nikki has. Go for it, please, Nikki.
I'd really like to endorse what Gina said, and that is, Gina and Alan said, and that is that the best way to do this is to involve the people in the industry itself, because otherwise we are so siloed. And this is what the former chairman of SME Alliance said, and he was a lawyer. he was saying our problem is we are siloed. We need to be working together, not working at odds with each other. We don't need to be them and us anymore. There are some good people in the banks. There are some good people in the FCA, and we need to be working together to resolve this situation, because if we just start accusing each other the whole time, all we end up doing is empowering the lawyers to find reasons why we can't work together. And if we take that equation out of it and start working together, I think we might find better results. And I think with everything that's going on at the moment, with the various different schemes and with the BBRS and the FOS and everything else, we need to engage the people who know what is happening, the people it's happening to, and the people who are causing these problems, to find a resolution. And we do not need clever lawyers in the middle, even though the chairman of SME Alliance was a lawyer. This is the idea. Let's not silo ourselves anymore. Let's work with each other and let's try and find resolutions. And where the resolutions are, we all have to be reasonable, because otherwise we're going to need £1 trillion to compensate all these people. Then we'll all be reasonable. But let's work with each other. Let's not always be banging our heads against a brick wall.
Yeah.
Can I just say though, it's not going to be easy. And I want to just call on Sue, if you don't mind, Sue. I'm going to put you in the limelight for a moment, because I mean, you know, you sat in the building, if you were, as it were. I mean, you know, what we're talking about is fighting an ingrained power imbalance, but also huge institutions, not just in the FCA, but the lawyers, as some people have mentioned. You know, I just wondered if you want to speak of some of the experience being of the consumer panel. And, you know, it is tough. It's going to be tough, whatever it is we decide to do.
I can do that, or shall I cover it in my just a minute?
Okay.
In the interests of time.
Okay, I think that probably is a very good cue to go to the just a minute. But before we do, can we please wave like children to Gina and Alan Millen for their presentation? Thank you very much for your contribution, Gina and Alan. It's wonderful, as always. Okay, we've got a few folk who wanted to have a chance to say what they wanted to say. So let's go to that now, and we'll try and do it in the right order. So we'll go in the order of the actual program. If you bear with me, folks, I need to find our event. Actually, we'll go to Sue first. Sue, could you kick off with your just a minute, please? Thank you.
Yes, I will. So I thought about loads of things I could talk about, but I was actually reading the Complaints Commissioner's last annual report, and I just wanted to read it if you haven't, because it's he pulls no punches. But I just wanted to pull out one case study, which I think is really illustrative of the way the FCA behaves. So the FCA is always banging on about use our register so that you know whether you're going to be scammed or not, because the firms on the register, it's all fine. Well, of course, it's not all fine. And somebody actually complained. They were scammed by a firm that was on the register that shouldn't have been. It should have been removed 12 years ago. Complaints Commissioner investigated, or did his common sense thing, and concluded the FCA should pay compensation of half the victim's losses. What the FCA said was, on our website, there's a warning to contact this was a passported in firm, there is a warning to contact the home regulator. In this case, I think it was Austria or Germany, Austria, I think. And the complainant didn't do that, so tough shit. And I think that kind of speaks volumes about the FCA, that it cannot see that if it sets up a register to help consumers and that consumers should be able to rely on, consumers can't be expected to do due diligence by ringing up overseas regulators. It's simply not reasonable to ask them to do that. So this poor, and the register has been a benchmark of mine for years and years and years, and I still don't think it's any better. But what also the Complaints Commissioner kind of calls out is that the FCA, and this is my own experience, the FCA is very defensive. It doesn't like to own up to its mistakes at all. It's very unconfident as an organisation. And that matters because an organisation that is not confident will be defensive. It will try to hide its mistakes. It will pull in the lawyers. The lawyers are massively risk averse at the FCA. All this stuff about Section 348, which Mark mentioned at the beginning, it's complete bullshit, frankly. And they hide behind it. So they hide behind this kind of veil, and then they expect the consumer, in effect, to do their own due diligence in this particular example, which I don't think is reasonable. So this compensation issue is really important. And as a sort of coda to that, I spent many happy years of my life working on the Equitable Life case when I was in the Treasury. Compensation needs to be timely. I think, I mean, I had to go and find a judge at some point who was not conflicted, i.e. didn't have an Equitable Life pension, to do the compensation scheme. And that must have been 10, 15 years ago. And so many people have died before they even got the compensation. So there's something about speed in this as well, would be my sort of, oh, lights have gone out. I've gone in the dark. So that's my quick rant. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, for your very quick rant. That was excellent. I think we go now to Alex Varley-Winter. Alex Varley-Winter, just a minute, without deviation, repetition, or whatever the other thing is. I'm only joking. Alex, over to you. If the timing's no good, Alex, we'll skip you and go to, yeah, we're gonna skip you and go to Terry. I can see you're distracted.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So, sorry, my daughter was just about to come in. I was like, anyway, yes, I was thinking about interviewing victims, but focusing very clearly on the regulators' complaints process, and also any times when issues have been raised to them repeatedly, but nothing's been done. But it would need to be very concise, because my aim is to just transcribe, no editing, no kind of fiddling with it, just to keep it completely as the person tells it. But for that to happen, it needs to be focused. So if anyone has any tips for people I can speak to who will be quite focused and go through the issues, that would be good. Also, Sue, I'd like to understand a tiny bit more about your background in terms of the panel. You said that the panel that you were on, that their influence is being curtailed, and did I catch you correctly on that? And
we could, well, legally it's a small change. In practice, it's actually quite great. Since I left, the panel rarely speaks publicly now. It very much is a creature of the FCA. But I'm happy to talk to you about that offline if you'd like to.
Okay, yeah, that sounds really good.
That would be a very good idea. Can I ask Alexandra to fix up a call for Alex Varley-Winter and Sue?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much indeed. Alex, I think you may have about 4 seconds left. Do you want to say anything?
No, that's fine.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Alex. We now go to Terry Bignell, a very well-respected IFA. Terry, share with us your thoughts, please. I think you're there somewhere, but I can't see you right now. Where are you?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go for it, Terry. Thank you. Nice applause, please. Off you go. You've got a whole minute all to yourself.
First, in response to Sue, the FCA register currently is closed. Yeah, so it's not available. So if an individual wants to check whether an IFA or a fund manager is authorised and regulated by the FCA, tough, they can't. The FCA register is closed. It's due to reopen currently in December, but we wait with bated breath as to whether that's going to happen. Right, so for example, and this is a real working case example, I had to send my certificates to a prospective new client late last week because she had researched me on the FCA register and my firm, and neither existed. And we knew about this because it's the same, the actual register has been taken down. So this is the register of registered individuals in the UK to give financial advice, not just the financial advisors. This is the banks, the building societies, fund managers. The entire register is closed at the moment. And it has been that way since about the 20th of December last year.
Thank you, Terry. The register is a key piece of the regulatory machinery. I mean, we're supposed to be creating an environment where the British public have good reason to have trust and confidence in our sector. And these are the sorts of prerequisites for this to function well. Terry, thank you for bringing that news to our attention.
So my next point, Andy, if I may, because I've still got a little bit of time, is that the common denominator in all of this is the FCA. Yeah? Yeah. In everything that's been said tonight, the common denominator has been the FCA. The FCA, quite frankly, is not fit for purpose. It's an old boys club. This is shown by the fact that Andrew Bailey, the former CEO of the FCA, is now is now the governor of the Bank of England. Yeah, it's jobs for boys. It's just ridiculous. Yeah, I've been to the FCA. I've had an event. I set up a new company some 20 years ago with a chartered accountant, and back then you had to go to the FCA and have an interview. Yeah, which we did. So I've actually been inside the FCA building, and if anyone else has done this, you'll find that on the walls of the FCA are the lyrics to a Bob Dylan song. Yeah, that artwork is worth a fortune. Yeah, yeah. So talk about a government quango. It's ridiculous.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you for making your point so clearly and so powerfully and so passionately, Terry. Nice of you to do so. We're now going to go to Mr. Philip Meadowcroft. Philip, I finally got a chance to contain you just 1 minute. I'm going to make the most of it. Go for it, Philip. Over to you.
Thank you, Andy. I have two more current examples of regulatory failings. The first one is the FCA has not reported on their investigation initially prompted by the Treasury Select Committee in November 2015 into whether the directors of HBOS, at the time it collapsed in 2008, should face legal action. The inquiry got underway in January 16, over 4.5 years ago. Nothing has yet emerged. The second one is the FCA was instructed by the Treasury Select Committee in March 2018, that's 2.5 years ago, to investigate whether Aviva had committed market abuse by its announcement following advice, according to the Times newspaper, from two of London's top investment banks and a Magic Circle law firm to redeem a category of its irredeemable preference shares. The announcement resulted in a collapse of the preference share prices across the market as a whole. 2 weeks later, Aviva dropped the plan. The FCA did not issue a word about this until June this year, after I finally managed through my MP and the current chairman of the Treasury Select Committee to get a response from the FCA, who said the matter is now a test case involving persons. I guess by various actors. I'm a pension fund trustee and an investment trustee, and our fund was badly hit by the Aviva action in March 2018. The words kicking and long grass come to my mind, especially now that I've found that the FCA can close down any investigation, give no reasons for doing so.
Philip, you keep accidentally putting yourself on mute, so I don't know how you're doing that, but you are.
And what? What have I done?
You were accidentally putting yourself on mute, but we can hear you now, Philip, but please carry on. Thank you.
I've nearly finished.
Okay.
The word balmy comes to my mind. Who is going to police the regulators? This will put you in a spot, Andy. Quis custodiet ipsos custodes, which is what that means. In this case, the Treasury Select Committee is very reluctant to bare its teeth as the FCA's boss, and it remains passive where it should be robust and feared. That's my bit.
Wonderful, Philip. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much indeed. Excellent. I think we've got to the end of our just a minute round. I think we have. And we did have Heather lined up to have her just a minute, but I think Heather, you've had it already, haven't you? Is that what you covered off early? Thank you for doing that. Okay, basically we're going to be wrapping up in a couple of minutes for the formal session, but two things before we do. No, actually three things before we do. First of all, thank you all very much for spending some time tonight. You know, good things can happen when good people find ways of getting together and having honest conversations and figuring out what we should do. And I think the absolute cherry on the icing on the cake is the point that Gina and Alan covered off, which was the idea of a Royal Commission. And I think that's an idea that ought to be taken very, very, very seriously. I've just put into the chat a request, and I would like everybody, please, to answer the question that I've put into the chat. You can answer yes if you want to, you can answer no if you want to, you can answer don't know if you want to, but please take the time to respond to the question. The question is this, it's an important question, okay? Should there be a Royal Commission to thoroughly investigate the UK's financial services sector, i.e. Gina Miller? I'm just trying to make sure that everyone realised that's the point that Gina was covering off earlier. Yes is okay answer, no is an okay answer, don't know is an okay answer, but let us have your feedback so that we can hopefully use some evidence from this very informal symposium that we knocked up in literally just a few days to respond to it. Wonderful stuff. Okay, it's just coming up to 8 o'clock. We will be formally wrapping the session up, although we're going to keep the channel open for what we call our fireside chat. What we mean by fireside chat is, as long as it's somehow relevant to what we've been talking about, say what you think, and I'll kind of unmute everybody, so we'll hopefully have a bit of a informal, unstructured conversation, a great chance to say anything you may want to say if you've not yet had a chance to. Oh look, Gina and Alan Miller think it's a good idea to have a Royal Commission. I think I agree. I agree. What a surprise! All right. I think everybody that knows me and everybody that knows the Transparency Task Force knows that we are trying so hard to be a constructively critical bunch when it comes to handling relationship with the regulators. You know, we're not about just kind of making someone's life a misery by just endlessly criticizing them. We genuinely think we understand what some of the issues are. We genuinely think there are real solutions to them. And we genuinely think that policymakers, politicians, regulators need to do the most important thing, which is to protect the British public from a financial services sector that sometimes gets a bit carried away with itself. Let me put it that way. There are, of course, many other ways of describing what I've just said. Let's take it upon ourselves to do what we can. If we do what we can achieve anything. And let's kind of end the session formally in that way. Okay. Thank you all very much indeed. As I say, if you want to Scarpa now's the time a good time to do so. If you want to carry on and chat informally with whoever else wants to stay in chat, then please do so. But I just want to finally, once again say thank you all very much indeed for your support and your engagement and your input. Thank you. We'll wave goodbye, but of course, if you want to stay, please do so. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers, Gina, Alan. Thank you very much, Heather. Thank you, everyone who's spoken, especially. Thank you. Okay, so if you want to stay, stay. If you don't want to stay, then time to Scarpa is now.
Could I just say, I just
yes, please. Yes, please, Kate, go for it.
I just put in the chat that the urgency that Gina referred to is so important, because the government, as we speak, the government is trying to make it almost impossible for ordinary citizens to bring judicial reviews. It is currently very difficult because you have to raise money through crowdfunding to sue the government, and then they try to hold you responsible for the costs of their defense. I myself have been very involved with several JRs over the years and crowdfunding, and you have to raise a lot of money. But there are, you know, attempts being made now to make it almost impossible for people to bring JRs. So we have to pause this consultation, as Gina and Alan said, and we have to demand through our MPs. We have to get on the phone and get on the email tomorrow morning with our MPs and with Lords. I happen to know a couple of members of the House of Lords, and just say, you know, you've got to take action.
Kate, thank you so much. Kate, could you do something for me? Because not everybody will know you. Could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your background, please? And by the way, apart from all the other brilliant things that Kate does and has done, she has also very kindly volunteered to be TTF's social media mentor, and she's giving us some great voluntary help. Kate, tell everybody a bit about yourself and your background, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I am a veteran of 5 banks. I have worked in the marketing function at HSBC, RBS, JP Morgan, Chase Manhattan, and most recently Deutsche Bank. I am currently a consultant working with startups, primarily in fintech and regtech. In addition to my marketing experience, I've spent a lot of time with compliance and regulatory management. So I'm very interested in transparency and protecting consumers from banks. And I'm also very worried about pensions because there have been a lot of scams for attacking older, vulnerable pensioners who have lost some of their life savings. And I think this is a national emergency. So thank you for inviting me, Andy. It was a great event, and there's so much work to be done.
Yeah, there certainly is. Thank you, Kate. And I'm going to invite Eva. We have Eva, I think it's Eva Adshed with us. Eva, could you please introduce yourself? Sorry we haven't chatted yet already, but take yourself off mute and just briefly introduce yourself. We'd love to know a bit more about who you are and what you think. Go for it, please, Eva. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, my name is Eva Adshed, as you say. And I was invited onto this chat. And what our problem was the RBS. And it goes back to 1988. And it was a huge fraud, and we eventually ended, my husband died, unfortunately, from the stress, and we ended up with absolutely nothing. We stood in the street with nothing. And it was basically that they were going to smack our bottoms because we were standing up for our rights, and I didn't like it. So the depravity in the actions, absolutely phenomenal. And so I don't want to take up your time because I'm sure you've heard this sort of thing many times. But the bottom line is that they took our property, was just at Benniston Hall near Buxton in Derbyshire. And they sold it for half the price, obviously, in 2002 for $500,000. Basically, they just wanted to make sure we had no money at all to fight on. And I haven't forgotten about it, obviously. I'm trying bits and pieces, but it's very, very hard to get anywhere against a big institution like that. Everybody's on their side because that's where the money is.
Thank you, Eva, very much for introducing yourself and telling us your history, your story. You may not be aware, we are in dialogue with Kevin Hollinrake. Kevin Hollinrake is an MP who is the one of the co-chairs of the all-party parliamentary group on fairer business banking. He's a lovely man, and we are doing things with Kevin to try to raise awareness of cases like yours. Could I please invite you to put your email address into the chat? If you don't know how to do it, just tell me, because we'll pick up with you and try to add you into the little group that are talking about these issues. Eva, thank you very much indeed. I can see we've got Bob Ward's hand is up, and also Mark Bishop would like to say something, and also Paul Gregory. Paul, let's go to you first. Paul Gregory, please go for it. Thank you.
We've got a slight IT problem here because I can't see the front of the screen. I'm just speaking without the sight of other people. First of all, it's very important that the Constitution is honoured. And in the Constitution, Bill of Rights says people may not be separated from their courts. What this government has done is put fees on everything to actually prevent the citizens from going to court, because as it's been pointed out, it is too expensive for anyone to take the risk. Now, all MPs have sworn to uphold the law, and I actually think that this constitutional point is something that could be raised and acted on. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Very strong points being made here. We'll go to Mr. Bob Ward with his digital blue, white on blue background hand up. Go for it, Bob.
I've got 4 very brief points, but
nicer now, please, Bob. Nicer now. Thank you.
Philip raised the point that no one's policing the regulators. That's the fundamental underlying problem. And then was it Terry said that there's a mural in the FCA's office. Unfortunately, they moved last year from Canary Wharf down to Whitechapel or something or other. So I don't know whether they took that with them. The main thing though is for Alex. Oh, he's still there, yeah. Everyone's focusing on the FCA as far as the financial scams and that, but that's only investments in contract-based pensions. It doesn't include trust-based pensions. That's TPR, and I equally put them into the frame of this, even though this discussion started because of the FCA's review. And at the moment, I think all the regulators need reviewing. So this is where the Royal Commission comes in. And also, there should be sitting above them an active body that looks at them over their shoulders. The current select committees only have an overview and they only listen to the reports that the regulators give them. They do not have a daily overview and they do not investigate, not unless we have something going through Parliament that forces them to. And then that last bit there in terms of Paul, in our situation where an injunction was applied for to freeze a bank account, when the bank then froze all the bank accounts under any names that were connected, including personal accounts, other businesses and whatever, that nothing to do with the thing. And then to defend that, the High Court wanted 15,000 up front to actually put a defence in place. And we weren't in a position to do that because they froze the bank accounts where our money was.
Yeah. Bob, thank you very much. And Alexandra, could you please organise for Alex Varley-Winter and Bob Ward to have a chat? I think Alex will want to know Bob's experience. Shaida, I'm just checking in with you to see if you're okay. Are you okay, Shaida? And is there anything you'd like to talk to us about? And may I first of all just ask, is there anybody with you in your home today? I'm just making sure you're okay, Shaida. Okay, you're on mute, Shaida. Thank you. Are you okay, Shaida?
Yes, I'm okay. I've got some eye problem. Just
okay. Thank you.
really enjoyed participating in this meeting. Thank you very much for organizing.
Yeah.
And I try to invite other friends like Eva.
Yes, thank you for doing that, Shaida. Thank you very much indeed. Lovely. Please that you're with us. Thank you. I think Mark Bishop also wanted to say something. Mark, please go for it. You're on mute, Mark. I don't know, or your volume's down, one or the other.
Sorry. Okay, I do apologise. I was on mute. So two things. The first one is you've said some good things about Kevin Hollenbrake. He's done a great job running the APPG for Fair Business Banking. Some good news. I can now confirm this is off the record, so journalists, please don't report.
Hold on. Whoa. Mark. We have a golden rule: no Chatham House. So if it's not something that you can tell the whole world, please don't say it at all. Okay, it's just that way. It's black and white. Okay. Otherwise, if somebody's report saying it didn't want to be reported, then it's kind of a grey area. Black and good, white good.
Can I ask a question? Are there any journalists still on the call?
Well, Alex Varley-Winter's a journalist, so yes, the answer is yes.
Cheers.
And frankly, everybody's a journalist these days. Social media means everyone's a journalist. So, in all honesty, if it's not a good time to say what you want to say, don't say it. But if you want to take the risk, that's entirely down to you.
So in that case, what I'll do is I'll say slightly less. Really, this raises a broader point, which is that the reason why the FCA is as it is because it's unaccountable, because the non-execs are chosen by the Treasury and the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills, or whatever it calls itself today. And there are 3 business panels, 3 industry panels, and 1 consumer panel. But the members of the consumer panel are also chosen by the FCA, and they're generally people that will not kind of rattle in any cages.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark, for that additional information. Much appreciated. Would anybody else like to say something else? We have Maria Pruzanskaya. Forgive me, I've probably not pronounced your surname very well, Maria. Maria, would you like to introduce yourself and share with us any thoughts that you've got? And we've also got Andrew Candy, who I think may have disappeared a while ago. Maria, please do say hello, Maria. Tell us all a bit about you and why you're interested in this. Thank you.
Okay, so basically I know here the French. I found here by reading her judgments. which is amazing. I find it amazing because they contain so many mistakes, and judiciary is not afraid of publishing it on the public websites. Then I know Dr. Araki, who invited today, and I am myself a victim of what the courts are doing. Because just today I received an order from the court to pay 15,000. It was about a couple of hours ago. And actually it's a purported order because it's made on the wrong form. It's completed wrongly, yeah, and it contains false information. So basically they're pressurizing me to pay this, and this might lead to my bankruptcy. So this is happening. That's why I'm a part of the group.
Got it, got it. Maria, thank you very much indeed for introducing yourself. Maria, if you wouldn't mind, please put your email address into the chat so we know we've got a means of contacting you afterwards. Thank you, Maria. And I know from the chat that Mr. Andrew Candy is with us. Andrew, please do join us and say hello and say who you are.
Hi, yes. I was one of the interest rate swap sort of initial cases that sparked off the original investigation into the banks, an original founder of Bully Banks, and was sort of involved and still involved in the whole process really. So I've had direct experience of the FSA under Wheatley and then the FCA under Bailey, and the way they've just totally corrupted the whole investigation and process from top to bottom. So that's my interest in seeing what's going to be done to hold them accountable.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew, for introducing yourself. I can see Alex wants to say something, and just before she does, can I ask my colleague Alexandra to fix up a call for Alex and Andrew Candy, Alex Varley-Winter and Andrew Candy. But Alex, please let's go back to you to make the point or ask a question you wanted to ask. You're on mute again, Alex. There you go.
Yeah, when I say that, when you say that the system has got worse, so when you say it's been corrupted, you mean there was a time when it was better, or because you've been you're like a veteran of this process. So at what point was it better than it is now?
Well, initially, as a brief overview, initially when I sort of took my complaint to the bank and they stonewalled it, I then went to the ombudsman, who acted totally inappropriately. I mean, they're as bad, if not worse, than the FCA. I actually then found myself phoning up the FCA, the FSA handbook team, to get them to explain the regulations to me, to find out under the regulations how the bank had missold the product to me, what they should have done, how they should have gone about it. The FCA, FSA handbook team were extremely helpful. I must have spent, 3-4 weeks solidly on the phone to them. And as a result of all my inquiries, their investigatory team got in touch with me. This was about mid-2011, and effectively said that suspicions were raised by the amount of inquiries I was making. Could I send them my information and evidence? And that they could, although they couldn't confirm anything further, there was an investigation going on into the bank for the mis-selling of swaps. Subsequently, the whole process evolved onwards into the press and then Bully Banks and then into the APPG for interest rate swaps. I was one of the first into the pilot process, and then when I called up the handbook team again to get information, we were told that interest rate swaps weren't actually regulated products. So there was misinformation. Then the whole handbook team were completely misinformed about the regulations in relation to swaps, and were giving out misinformation to potential victims quite dramatically that would dissuade them from progressing their complaints further. This complaint was raised with Christina Sinclair and then David D'Souza within the FCA, who sort of stonewalled and put us off and made excuses, but did confirm the regulations were in place. And you'll be extremely surprised to learn that in this last 2 weeks, I've been making inquiries with them again. As soon as you mention swaps, you get immediately referred to their supervision team, and the supervision team actively try and dissuade you from investigating. And again, they'll misinform you and tell you that interest rate swaps are regulated, but interest rate hedging products aren't regulated, which is a lie. So
wow.
they're misinforming the public. Anybody phoning up the public concerned they may have been missold a swap will be directly misinformed by the FCA's handbook, their supervisory team, which is.
And do you think they're just being told what to say? And
yeah, it's a complete fabrication. It's deliberately designed. I've literally asked them to explain the rules to me, and they've said that they don't interpret the rules. They won't engage in a case. I've said, I don't need you to engage in a case. I just want you to explain your rules to me. Under this rule, what should they have provided me with? They're refusing to do it. They say I should approach the bank and ask them what they should have provided me with. They then say that the FOS should then undertake that role, and they're effectively refusing to explain the actual FSMA to me, which is bonkers, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And it's actively, the custom can't afford to get legal advice in most cases. So it's an example of the FCA actively obstructing a customer from finding out what the applicable rules are. I mean, that's appalling.
That's something seriously going wrong there, Andrew. Something seriously going wrong there, culturally, operationally. All sorts of alarm bells are going off in my head. Alex and Andrew, have that conversation and see what you can do.
Yeah,
I'm going to ask Michael Gearing to introduce himself. Now, folks, Michael is on the other side of the world. So he's been up for since like 3:30 in the morning, I think, to be with us today. Michael, am I right in thinking you're in Australia right now, sir?
Yes, that's right. So it was a bit of an early start. And look, thanks, Andy. My only comments, and I've been really impressed with what's been said, so I'm suspect in making any comment really, but the Royal Commission in Australia probably didn't really do what we're talking about this evening.
Okay, tell us more.
It gave the regulator in Australia, ASIC, which is the equivalent to the SEC, a big kick up the backside to take more criminal action, which in a sense is good. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But what it didn't do, listening to this evening, is I don't believe it's taken substantial action to empower consumers. And there's a difference, because the regulator will take the big issues to court, but will it help consumers' individual issues? I'm not so sure. And the final comment I'd make is that I believe, as you know, Andy, culture is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And what I'm terrified when I listen to this evening is, where are the chairmen and boards of these companies when all these matters are being discussed? I just don't understand where they are. That's all from me, Andy.
Michael, thank you so much for your points, and thank you also for doing the extraordinary thing of getting up at, say, 3 in the morning to be with us today. Really appreciate it, Michael. Michael's one of our ambassadors in Australia, so thanks, Michael, for being with us. Much appreciated. I can see that Mark Bishop would like to speak. Mark, go for it.
I'm very grateful for Michael for his comments, because I do think that something like this, some kind of public airing of, dirty washing, is what's required. And it may be that we learn from the experience of Australia and do something big and better. I have to say, when I read some of the transcripts, what happened in Australia was bad, but actually you should beat some of our guys in the city. They make your guys look like pussycats. We're dealing with a problem that is even bigger. So, in the words of the guy on Jaws, we're going to need a bigger boat. And actually, it's a shame that both Nikki Turner and also the Millers are no longer on this call, because Nikki Turner, or perhaps more her husband Paul, for ages has been saying, what's needed in this is a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. A bit like what happened in South Africa, a bit like what happened in Northern Ireland. What needs to happen is an opportunity for the industry and the regulator to fess up. This is what we did wrong. Offer redress. Here's how we intend to put it right. And in return for those things, perhaps get immunity from prosecution. And in the case of firms and individuals in the industry, they're allowed to continue with their permissions intact. That's the kind of thing that I think needs to happen. And you can call it a Royal Commission, or you can call it something else. But to me, it's the desired end goal.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, it's 8:25. We've got up to another 5 minutes, or we could wrap it up there. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to share? Mr. Bob Ward.
Quickly, Alex, I sent a little chat thing through. I'm not sure whether you read it or not. Just have a little look.
Let me check up.
Yeah, about TPR complaints process.
Yeah, and Andy, if you can ask Tina or something to get it on the site. There's some of the information I put on there with the links.
Yeah.
Oh, oops. Sorry, I was about to. I thought I'd muted it. Yeah, I was going to ask. Because this consultation is looking at the FCA's complaints process, but is the TPR's complaints process similar? If they've done something wrong, is it a similar process? Is it, or is
it's worse?
Jeez.
No,
okay.
We're looking at the complaints process of the FCA and obviously the banks and PRA, but all the different regulators have got different enactments giving them processes for complaint. There needs to be an overarching complaints process for all regulators, right? Because we've got 3 involved in this one. The TPR is basically, their site says that if you've got a complaint, we're going to give it to the person you're complaining about to comment on it first. Instead of doing an internal investigation, they get that person to decide whether it's worthy of a complaint. And then the next stage, it goes to the team of complaints. And then after that, they wash their hands. You've got to go to your MP to get him to raise a parliamentary ombudsman's review. There's no complaints process there at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's worse than what you're talking about with the FCA one. So part of this Royal Commission, it's the whole financial services that's got to be included in all these areas. Because if you've got a complaint, as far as pensions are concerned, it's going to be involving both regulators and HMRC even worse, because you're going to be bouncing about to them, because you've got the regulators controlling statutory trustees have been put in place for closing schemes. They've given them carte blanche not to issue annual returns or annual reports, no accounts. They can charge what they like. That they're all using the same lawyers, so you can't go anywhere because they've got conflict of interest. And the whole thing is just grinding to a halt, and that is common amongst all the regulators at the moment. So whatever is being discussed now for these 3 on this review needs to be widened to encompass all statutory bodies that are involved in financial services.
Bob, thank you very much indeed. I didn't realise it was even worse. Thank you, Bob. Eva, please do speak, Eva. You're very welcome to.
Yeah, I think that what Mrs. Stansfeld said is the only way forward to expose all this, and that is that 190 billion pounds of fraud is being, the money is being lost every year now. And if the government can just be induced to putting a lot of money into something like the NCA, for instance, to investigate these frauds properly, not just to say we haven't got time, we haven't got the money, no resources. If we can get that done, that should actually expose the whole thing.
Yeah. I agree, Eva. Thank you very much. Heather, anything you'd like to say in your final comments, Heather?
I thought it was interesting to hear, was it Andrew Candy say before, I think, that even the supervisors at the SRA, I beg your pardon, at the FCA are giving members of the public and complainants a bum steer about the facts and law and etc. and so forth, because it's the culture all the way through. And I agree with Eva. I think Anthony's way is really the only way forward. Anything else is tinkering, because this is a root, what do they call it? A root and branch sort of thing. This is set up to be rubbish, to be corrupt, and that's how it's being run. So, and the complaints, I totally agree. I mean, those complaints processes are a load of nonsense, and they're designed to take the focus away from the real problem. I mean, just quickly, like there needs to be forensic investigation as to what these people are doing in these regulatory bodies. And just as I mentioned about the FSCS, people would know that is being that it is being actually outsourced to a company called Quest. You know, they are doing the FSCS's job. Who knows that? I mean, I wouldn't have known that without doing a bit of sniffing around. And then, you know, you've got all the big, you know, law firms with their snouts in the trough, the accountants, this and that. So money that's being, you know, my case involved in insurers to solicitors, which was a smaller branch of this, my case. And so everyone files for insolvency, and they seem to have allocated all the money and for themselves and you know, the odd insured if you're lucky. But for somebody like me, I'm just not on the radar. I'm not on in their plan. But they can do what they like, and there seems to be shadow. This is really, really serious what's going on, and I don't think anybody should be kidding themselves that we're getting straight answers to what's really going on, because it's extraordinary. You know, it's mind blowing, and I think it. I'll just finish on my experience of regulators is that they were set up to take the law out of the law, to take the liability out of the law.
Wow, what a point. That's a profound point. That really is a profoundly powerful point. Alex, go for it, Alex. Thank you, Heather. Thank you very much, Heather. Alex.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy.
Well, Heather's case was one of the first, as a rookie, I think it was one of the first cases that opened my eyes to how can I put this without sparking problems for myself? Lawyers having an unfair advantage in the courts if they've done something wrong, in my opinion. So yeah, so she pushed and pushed for the SRA to properly investigate a group of lawyers, and she had to. I was hearing from her at the time, and it was just like, and I watched it in court, and it just went on and on and on without any proper investigation, and it just all around the houses. But did you say earlier that there's a connection between that? Does the FCA have any responsibility for the SRA, or are they completely separate?
No, it absolutely does. I can, yeah, as I mentioned before, the SRA has its teeth. It all comes under the umbrella of the Financial Services and Markets Act 2000. And the SRA is an applicable approved regulator, and they are answerable in that regard, and answerable to the FCA, which is kind of funny, isn't it? So they're all linked, and there are memorandums of understanding and things like that, and they're all amount to a pile of poo, really. I'm sorry, but I'm over.
No.
I'm over being polite about this.
I
Are you aware that Anthony Townsend was a former chief exec of the SRA, and obviously is the complaints commissioner for the FCA? So so there's some interesting conflicts of interest there as well.
I mean,
and while it's good that he did sort of come out and say that this consultation is too truncated and all that stuff, I still, like, to me as a journalist looking at it, I looked at the complaints process and just think, well, you've got a complaints process, but you're doing it all on paper. You're not even interviewing the complainant. Like, that's the first thing I'd do if I was writing a story, is to interview the person that's talking to you. Otherwise, you can't have any back and forth whatsoever. I mean, maybe you want to limit it, but I mean, just instinctively, that's how, you wouldn't, it's not really fair not to give them a hearing.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Alex. Thank you. Our last point for the evening goes to Mr. Mark Bishop, without whom the whole of today's session quite literally would not have happened, because I was blissfully unaware, perhaps this was by design, of the very fact that the consultation was going on. Mr. Mark Bishop, your final point, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that Heather mentioned another rabbit hole, and that is memorandums or memoranda of understanding.
Oh, yes.
When we first reported Connaught, we did so to the City of London Police, and they said we can't investigate. And then we reported to the Metropolitan Police, and they said exactly the same thing. Eventually, we got a meeting with the Met, and they said you should be aware that there were memoranda of understanding between the regulator and key police services in the UK. And essentially what happens is if you report a financial services crime to the police, they refer it to the FCA. And the FCA almost always says, don't worry, we'll investigate. The police are very happy to hand it over because these are complex investigations that cost a lot of money. And of course, what it means is that they go on a big spike on someone's desk and they never get investigated. Yeah. So I think that has happened in a lot of cases.
Thank you. Thank you.
And in my case.
Sorry, Andy, shall I say something?
Yes, please, Shada, thank you.
Regarding memorandum of understanding, I was aware of this and I brought it to the attention of the Law Society in 2004. And they said that nothing will stop you to go and report to the police. And when I went and reported to the police, and I got it in writing from the police.
Oh, there's some interference on the...
Hold on, I'm going to mute everybody apart from Shada. Just bear with me a second, please, Shada, just to try to manage this this noise situation. Hold on. Oh, it's gone. Carry on, Shady. Carry on.
Yeah, I would like to send you the copy of the letter that police wrote to me after I was referred from the Law Society to go to the police. And when I went to the police, 5 months pursuing the case from by the police against that solicitor, I got it in writing that the Law Society wrote to the police, said there is no need for your intervention. We are looking in this case, and this goes to February 2005. And if the Law Society would have investigated my complaint, I wouldn't be made wrongly bankrupt. My husband wouldn't be made bankrupt. And for the last 15 years, we've proven we are not bankrupt. 3 times I've been referred by the Law Society to go to the police. Every time I went to the police, the Law Society wrote to the police, and I've got all this in the black and white, and said to police, don't investigate it. And now Mr. Anthony Sanfield is taking it up with the Law Society, questioning them to say that why did you stop the police to investigate that criminal?
It's like it sounds like just a cover up, isn't it? I'm sorry to be so simplistic about it, but basically, people are protecting their backsides and covering up. This is not what should be happening in the 21st century. In one of the best, if not the best country in the world, as far as I'm concerned, things need to be better than they are.
I'll just say I had a similar experience to Sheeta in terms of the SRA and the tennis, the ping pong played between the SRA and the police, and you know, even a situation. I mean, nothing will surprise the people who on this call, but you know, even the actual solicitor violently assaulting me, physically violently assaulting me, and the SRA not doing anything about it, covering it up.
My God, Heather.
That's how bad it is.
Yes, I'm witness to that.
That is, you know, this is nothing new. I'm sorry to come in here, but this is just unfortunately nothing new at all. This is massive. This has been, in our case, been going on for 30 years. And all I want you to do is to die.
Yeah, right. It's true. But we don't.
They would do, but they just do everything else. I mean, I actually was almost successful in winding up the Royal Bank of Scotland in 1998.
Bloody hell, Ava.
Because they didn't catch on to the statutory demand I sent. And it was just a matter of hours before I could have issued a petition. Just matter of hours, and the court was closed in Manchester, and they had to phone me, and they had to speak to a judge on the telephone to get an injunction. And the injunction was that we will all get imprisoned. Yeah, that's how they work.
Yeah.
I'm staggered. Eva, are you Swedish?
Yes.
Yeah. Alexandra Zitkus, my colleague, is Swedish. She recognised your accent as being Swedish. Lovely, lovely. Folks, we're going to wrap it up now, but I think let's think of this as the beginning of something, not the end of something. So we're a tenacious bunch. We are principled. We are mission-led. We are empowered by the simple fact that we know we're trying to do something right and proper for all the right reasons. So thank you again, Mr. Mark Bishop, for bringing this matter to our attention. I'm ever so pleased with what we've managed to do in such a short period of time together. Mark, can you give me a call sometime tomorrow to talk about your news on the APPG front? That's actually very, very interesting to me, as I know you'll understand. Okay, we'll wrap it up there. Mr. Michael Gearing on the other side of the world, have a good breakfast. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Cheers, guys.
Andy, thank you for calling this meeting.
Most
been fantastic.
Thanks all. Thank you. Bye-bye. 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 Thank you. Cheers, folks. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Andy.
You're welcome. You're all very, very welcome. It's just, it's disgusting that you've been through what you've been through. In fact, you know, Eva, Heather, Sheila, you're all on this. You're the last ones on the call, and it is just disgusting. You know, from one human being to other human beings, it is disgusting what you've had to endure. And hopefully,
you haven't heard a bit like this of what people do. Not like that. These people are ruthless. These people would kill you, murder you, but they can't shoot you, so they do it quietly. And eventually they know you're going to die. He's dead. He's died.
Yeah.
The problem is solved. Yeah.
On that note, on that cheery note, we'll wrap it up. Bravo! Thank you very much for speaking out. Thank you. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a million.
Thanks, Alexander, as well. Thanks, Heather. Nice to know you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Wow. What an evening. Wow. I feel like I've just grown up today, you know?